Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. My name is Tran. Today's story we'll be reading is The Life of Sariputta, compiled and translated from the Pali text by Nyanaponika Thera. Part 2, Maturity of Insight, The Turner of the Wheel, 1-2. The discourses of Sariputta and the Buddhas attributed to him form a comprehensive body of teaching that for scope and variety of exposition can stand beside that of the Master himself. Sariputta understood in a unique way how to organize and present the rich material of the Dhamma lucidly, in a manner that was intellectually stimulating and also an inspiration to practical effort. We find this exemplified in two classic discourses of the Mahima Nikaya, the Samaditi Sutta, or number 9, and the greater Sutta on the elephant footprint simile, or number 28. The greater discourse on the elephant footprint simile is a masterpiece of the metaphysical treatment. It begins with the statement that the Four Noble Truths compromise everything that is solitary, then singles out the truth of suffering as being identifiable with the 5 aggregates of personality. From these, the aggregate of corporeality is chosen for detailed investigation. It is shown to consist of the 4 great elements, each of which is said to be internal and external. The bodily parts and functions belonging to the internal element are stated in detail. And it is said of both the internal and external elements that they neither belong to a self nor constitute a self. This insight leads to disgust and detachment regarding the elements. The discourse then goes on to show the impermanence of the mighty external elements. When they are involved in great upheavals of nature, and against the background, it is stressed that this tiny body, the product of craving, can never be regarded as I or mine, but considered in the sense of I am. And then a monk who has this firm and deeply rooted insight meets with abuse, blame and hostility on the part of others. He is able to analyze the situation soberly and so remain master of it. He recognizes that the painful feeling that has risen in him is produced by ear contact, which is in itself no more than a conditioned phenomenon. And of all the constituent parts of the situation, he knows that they are impermanent. This he discerns with reference to contact, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. At this point of the discourse, we see that the other 4 aggregates, the mental components of personality, are introduced in an organic context, together with the already mentioned factor of contact. The discourse then continues. Then his mind, just by taking only the elements as his object, becomes elated, gladdened, firm, and intense. And even if he is being injured, he will think, this body is of such a nature that is liable to such injuries. Thereupon, he recollects the master's simile of the saw and will resolve to follow the Buddha's injunction to suffer all injuries in patience, whatever may happen to him. But the sermon continues. If one thus remembering the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the monk's equanimity does not endure, he will be stirred by a sense of urgency and feel ashamed that in spite of that recollection of the triple gem, he could not remain constant. On the other hand, if this endurance persists, he will experience happiness. Even to this extent, much has been achieved by that monk, says the Sutta. Here, all the four elements are treated identically. The concluding section starts by comparing the body and its constituent parts with the house, which is made up of its various components. After that follows an exposition of the conditioned arising of the sixfold perceptual consciousness, and mentioning the 5 sense organs and 5 sense objects as the basic conditions for the arising of 5 sense consciousness. Derived corporality is here introduced by means of a prominent part of it, thus completing the treatment of the corporeal with the state of consciousness having thus arisen. All 5 aggregates are given. And in that way, their conjunction can be understood, as well as their dependent origination. And in this connection, Sariputta quotes the Master, "He who understands dependent origination understands the Dhamma, and he who understands the Dhamma understands dependent origination, desire, inclination, and attachment in regard to the 5 aggregates is the origin of suffering. Removal of that desire, inclination, and attachment is the cessation of suffering. And of the monk who has understood that this is, it is said, even to this extent much has been achieved by the monk. Thus the exposition is rounded off with the 4 noble truths. This discourse is indeed like an intricate and beautifully constructed piece of music, ending on a solemn and majestic chord. Another model exposition of the Venerable Sariputtas is the Samadhi Sutta. This is a masterpiece of teaching, which also provides a framework for further elaboration, such as given in extensive commentary to it. The commentary says, in the Buddha word as collected in the 5 great Nikayas, there is no discourse other than the discourse on the right understanding, wherein the 4 noble truths are stated 32 times, and 32 times the state of arahatship. The same discourse also gives us an original exposition of dependent origination, with slight but very instructive variations. Each factor of dependent origination is used, as are also the additional sections to illustrate the right understanding of the 4 noble truths, the comprehension of which is thus greatly enhanced, broadened, and deepened. This discourse has been widely used for instructional purposes throughout the centuries down to the present day. Another of the Venerable Sariputta's discourses is the Samasitta Sutta, which was listened to by the devotees of tranquil mind. It is concerned by the first 3 stages of sanctity, the stream winner, the once returner, and the non-returner. Its purpose is to clarify the question of the residence of rebirths. In the five-sense world, or in the five material and non-material worlds, which depends upon this mode of practice and on the fetters of existence still remaining. It is very short discourse, but had a singular impact on the huge assembly of Devas, who, according to a tradition, assembled to hear it. It is said that a very large number of them attained arahatship, and innumerable were those who reached stream entry. This discourse of the Venerable Sariputta is the fact counted among the few which had usually far reaching results among beings of the higher worlds. And although it is a very brief text, rather cryptic, without the commentarial explanation, it had a high reputation in succeeding centuries. It is the sermon that was preached by the Arhat Mahinda on the evening of his arrival in Ceylon, and the Mahavamsa 1434 FF. Ceylon's famous chronicle relates that on this occasion also numerous devas listened and achieved penetration of the Dhamma. The high regard in which the discourse is held, and the strong impact ascribed to it, may be attributed to the fact that it helps those on the path to define their position as to the kind of rebirths still to be expected by them. Devas on higher levels of development are sometimes inclined to regard their heavenly status as final and do not expect to be reborn in the five-sense world, as may sometimes be the case. The Great Elder's discourse gave them a criterion by which to judge their position. For worldling still outside the path as well, it must have offered valuable orientation for the direction of their efforts. The Sangati Sutta, or the recital, and Dansutara Sutta, or up to 10. Two more of the Venerable Sariputta's sermon are the last two texts of the Digha Nikaya, the collection of long discourses. Both these texts are compilations of doctrinal terms, in which a large number of topics are clarified as falling into groups of from 1 to 10 members. The reason for writing the compilation only up to 10 may have been that there are only very few groups of doctrinal terms extending beyond 10 members, and these could be supposed to be well known and easily remembered. The Sangati Sutta was preached in Persia of the Buddha, and at its conclusion received his express approval. While in the Sangati Sutta, the doctrinal terms are arranged solely in numerical groups of 1 to 10. And the Dasutara Sutta, each of these 10 groups has tenfold subdivision, which serves to bring out the practical significance of these groups. For example, one thing is one of great importance. 2, should be developed. 3, should be fully known. 4, should be abandoned. 5, implies decline. 6, implies progress. 7, is hard to penetrate. 8. Should be made to arise. 9. Should be directly known. 10. Should be realized. What is one thing of great importance? Heedfulness in solitary things. These texts must have been compiled at a fairly late period of the Buddha's and Venerable Sariputta's life, when there was only in existence a large body of doctrine and carefully transmitted discourses which required organizing for ready use, and also anthologies of salient features of the Dhamma became a useful aid in the comprehensive study of the teaching. The Sangati Sutta was delivered at the time of Niganta Nataputta's death, on the date of which, however, scholars differ. It was, in fact, this event that occasioned the preaching of the sutta, for it speaks of dissensions, schisms, and doctrinal disagreements that arose among the Jains immediately after the death of their master, Niganta Nataputta, otherwise Mahavira. This was taken as a warning example by the Venerable Sariputta, who in his discourse stresses that this text should be recited by all in concord and without dissension, so that the holy life should last long for the welfare and happiness of gods and men. The commentators say that the Sangati Sutta is meant to convey the flavor of concord, or samagi rasa, in the teaching, which is strengthened by doctrinal proficiency, or dasana kusalata. The practical purpose of the Suttara Sutta is indicated in the Venerable Sariputta's introductory verses. The Dusuttara, or discourse, I shall proclaim, a teaching for the attainment of Nibbana and the ending of suffering, the release from all bondage. Dasuttaram Pavakami Dhammam Nimbi Payataya Dugis Antakiriyaya Sabhagam Hapatnokam. It seems likely that these two suttas served as a kind of index to selected teachings. They may have been useful to those monks who did not memorize a great many texts. To them, they may have been helpful in presenting numerous aspects of the teaching in a form that was easily memorized and assimilated. Both of these discourses admirably illustrate the Venerable Sariputta's concern with the preservation of the Dhamma, and his systematic way of ensuring that it was transmitted intact in all its details. It was for the purpose that he provided study aids such as these and other discourses, together with works like the Nidesa. Nam Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Nam Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Nam Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha.